All right, people, another week, another episode, season 6, episode 7, entitled The Broken Man. Man, I am surprised at how much I'm loving this back half of season 6. I was expecting that, we were going to kind of be waylaid in subplot territory, which for the most part we have been after last week's episode. And here we get, again, the return of another fan favorite character. This season has been the return of all the characters that we thought were gone. We get the Hound back in this episode with the Broken Man. And oh wait, next week's episode is no one. Never mind. This streak is over too quickly. I don't know, Pat. What's your thoughts on tonight's episode at the very least?
Listen. I hope the Talking TV family that's Talking Thrones with us tonight can agree with me that there's not just one broken man, right? It's like an Oprah Winfrey show. You're a broken man. You're a broken man. You're a broken man. And I'm talking about Jaime. I'm talking about the Hound. I'm talking about Ian McShane, right? That's his name, the actor. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of broken men around, not just one man. So
indeed. Trying to pick up the pieces. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. Pat, this stretch of the show is probably, I think, going to be the most interesting that we cover as far as, where we are on this journey towards the finale. Because we're very close to the end of season 6. We're very close to Battle of the Bastards. We're very close to the end of the show, as I've been continuously hyping up for the last couple of episodes. And what's so strange is that about kind of season 6 as a whole is that season 6 is really the season where the show ultimately got too mainstream for its own good. Now, what I mean by that is that this is still the point where we still got some great writing, some great storytelling. I previously had we lambasted all of season 5 for just having completely seemingly lost everything that made the show so great to begin with. And then we get to season 6, and you can imagine my surprise when I'm like, okay, so not only does this season surprisingly hold up for the most part from the first time when I watched it, when I was just juicily waiting for every week, every Sunday for every new episode, like it was a next delicious, morsel to consume as we built up towards Battle of the Bastards and this awesome finale. But on top of that, it's also a matter of where, okay, so they're still trying to bring back, I feel like, a lot of the awesome stuff that we loved about the show for its first 4 seasons, but they're also ultimately waylaid down by the fact that the audience now has so many expectations, and it ultimately gets to that point where so many shows wish they get. But then once they get there, they realize what a mistake that is, because now they realize that they are ultimately at the beck and call of the fans, and everything that they do and say is going to be under a microscope. And to some extent, that was always the case with the show, but I feel like this is the point where it really, really, really becomes apparent. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Listen, I think season 6 so far I've enjoyed. I think there's a lot more kind of filler moments. They're kind of bopping around to a lot of different characters, and we get short, sweet scenes, and not necessarily like these big major developments. They're just sort of the right development for the moment, and it kind of sets things up going forward, and it kind of it feels consistent. That's a good thing, and it just kind of gets us from point A to point B, and we're really we're on cruise control into the Battle of the Bastards, and it's really disappointing because I was watching this episode last night to prep for this episode of our podcast today, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna stay up late and I'm gonna watch Battle of the Bastards, and then I realized there's another episode between what we're talking about today and the Battle of the Bastards, and it was
this is one of those pieces where I'm like, I wish they'd shortened that an episode, because if you just take out that one episode, I'm telling you, Pat, if not for this one episode that we are unfortunately begrudgingly going to have to cover next week, I'm trying to save as much of my lambastement for when we get to it.
Well, it's called what should we call it? No one.
No one.
That's the name of the episode.
No one. More like I wish that no one had ever watched this episode, or no one ever thought to think of that episode.
I saw that on the episode list, and I was like, I'm going to bed early. It's like we'll talk about it next time, and we'll see what my thoughts are. But I looked at it, and I was just like, not tonight. I definitely was
it's so
amped for
bring that
Battle
up,
of the
because
Bastards.
it's season 6 is the season that's praised for finally being the biggest. The show had always been praised for its epic scope and scale, but season 6 felt like the first season that really fully capitalized on it. Obviously it caps off with Battle of the Bastards and Winds of Winter. You have Jon coming back to life. You have all these crazy moments. As you can imagine my surprise when the thing that really makes season 6 great is the fact that it is still very much trying to be like the first 4 seasons of the show. It's trying to be more character based. It's trying to be more low key. It's trying to be about these little moments that exist in between the bigger scale moments in order to like kind of try and tie things together and, you know, like get back to what it is that made the show interesting in the first place, which is characters, seeing how these characters interact, seeing, you know, how they play off of each other. And this episode, I think, is probably the best demonstration of that. I think even better than last week's, because last week's was still kind of waylaid down by the whole High Sparrow ultimately seizing control of the city. But this week, for the most part, it's smaller moments. You know, it's like you have like kind of the aftermath of the High Sparrow's victory in King's Landing. You have Jon and Sansa kind of beginning their recruitment tour. You have these brief moments with Theon and Arya, which we'll get to. And then the biggest thing, I mean, if you want to just kick off the episode right now, we got the Hound back, man. I want to say this is the first episode that we've gotten that's not a premiere or a finale that actually has a cold open. So that was the most surprising to me. I remember very vividly watching this episode back in 2016, where I'm like, okay, we got the King's Landing thing last week. You know, we got Sam. I'm like, okay, last week was kind of a pit stop. So, okay, now we're getting back to the action. So you can imagine my surprise, but not only do we have a cold open, I'm like, what are we doing? Who are these people? Where is this? Like, what are they building, like a sept of something? Like, I didn't know what it was. And I really wasn't sure what this scene was building up to until you see the pullback and you see this super tall guy carrying a log, and he turns around, and I'm like, holy shit, he's back. You know, like, obviously, I'll say this about the Hound's kind of abrupt exit from the show from the first time versus kind of where it was. The Hound's exit was always kept very intentionally ambiguous. And obviously, you know, before Game of Thrones started breaking this rule left and right, it was always kind of the old school television mantra of if you don't see them die on screen, then they can always come back. Naturally, Game of Thrones broke that the next season with Stannis. Then it does it again this season, obviously, you know, unfortunately in the next episode too with the Blackfish. But you know, there was always kind of this rumor that the Hound was still alive. We leave the Hound in the books, the exact same place where he was left at the end of season 4. And the whole thing is that when Brienne is going on her quest, or rather her kind of, you know, wild goose chase in order to try and find Sansa in the Book of Feast for Crows, she actually stumbles upon not exactly this commune, but a commune that's similar. And it's very strongly hinted that the guy who's running the commune, you know, I don't think his name is Brother Ray in the books, but it's something similar, is covering up for the Hound, you know, because he hints at the fact that it was like, oh, you know, we have this gravedigger. We found him. He was very close to death, but we brought him in and now he's helping us out. You know, you never actually see him, but it's very strongly hinted that that's the Hound. So throughout season 5, obviously, you know, the Hound and Bran were two of the main characters, main cast members that were absent from that season. And it you know, what's it called? And then going into season 6, it was a thing of where people had almost forgotten about it because the show almost treated him like he was essentially gone from the show. And so when he came back in this episode, it was really a huge surprise. And then when not only did they bring him back, but they also focused a majority of this episode on him, and probably one of the best storylines and kind of one-off subplots this show's ever had. I mean, masterfully done, to say the least.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, you know, and the fact is, like, I remember the first run through, you know, basically having dinner parties with the friends and, you know, enjoying Game of Thrones week to week. And we all heard, you know, that, was it Schillinger? Is that his name?
No.
Deadwood?
No. Swearingen.
Swearingen, okay.
You're in the HBO characters mixed up. Schillinger is J.K. Simmons' character from Oz.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. So basically, Swearinger, you know, our good old pal Ian,
Yep.
who
Ian
does
McShane.
a lot of, he does a lot of great roles. You know, Deadwood, by the way, amazing show. Just they didn't need to do a movie 10 years later or whatever it was.
That was essentially just the same thing as what we got in season 3.
Yeah, it was a season 3 recap, and I was like, what? But anyway, you know, obviously Ian did a great job again, but you know, it's, you know, if you get a chance to play the same performance twice, well, I guess, you're going to do a great job. But, the main thing is he's here, he's in Game of Thrones. I remember like the first watch through, you know, season 6, all the publicity and like PR that was coming up, and his name is on the roster, right? You know, he's going to be in this season, and everybody's like, what role is he going to play? And everyone's excited. And,
Right.
you know, it's like, you get to this episode and there he is, right? You see him right in the opening of the show, and it's like, yeah, this episode's going to get real. And although we thought he was going to be, you know, definitely like a more important character, I think someone that, you know, could shake up the landscape a little bit and be in maybe a couple episodes, maybe not like, you know, for the rest of the series, but I personally thought he was going to be a character that was in a few episodes. You know, no, they just kind of brought him in to be a self-contained, one episode, type of character. And, this episode is almost akin to sort of like Breaking Bad with the Fly episode, where it's kind of like, it kind of stands on its own. The major arc is sort of almost like just a moment away from the series. Like this storyline is not 100% like the main story, but it takes up the majority of the time in this episode, and or at least it has the most impactful emotional resonance on the viewer.
Yeah, I think what's probably the most fascinating about the storyline is, despite the fact that it feels like the centralized storyline, it kicks off and kind of ends the episode, it doesn't actually take up the majority of the screen time. I think a majority of the screen time is still occupied by the siege at Riverrun and the siege at Riverrun and the North. But I mean, Ian McShane, I feel like, is kind of the dictionary definition of there's no small parts at all. Like, Ian McShane is the type of actor, you give him a lead role, you give him a supporting role, you give him a one-off role, it doesn't matter. He's going to come in, he's going to kick ass. I remember. I think the first time I remember seeing his name, if I remember correctly, was, I know for a fact he had a lot of voiceover roles back in the day, because he's one of those guys who's just got such a distinct voice. He's got such a distinct persona, even for a Brit. And like the fact that he's one of the few actors that, like, he really doesn't care what the material is. He really only cares that it's great, and that he could just give his all to it. And so I think the first thing I saw him in, or remember seeing his name in, was
Death Race.
Well, no, surprisingly, that's not Death Race. I was a little bit too young when that movie came out. No, he voiced the villain Tai Lung in the first Kung Fu Panda movie for DreamWorks, which I watched, which you can bet your ass I watched as many times as I possibly could when I was a kid. That was one of my favorite movies to watch when I was a kid. And I just started to see him over and over again. And so naturally, when I made my discovery of HBO when I was in high school, you can imagine my surprise where I'm like, oh, so that's where this guy has been this entire time, And it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, he comes in, he has this incredible little arc that happens literally only in this one episode. Like you were saying at the beginning, they use it as this really great self-contained story in order to present this metaphor, and it's a perfect reintroduction to the Hound as the character. And the way that they do it, they don't necessarily use a super complex story. They kind of fill you in exposition-wise. This guy, they clearly found the Hound sometime after Arya left him for dead at the end of season 4. He was beyond surprised.
That was one of the greatest descriptions ever.
Oh, so good.
I found you, and I thought by the time I picked you up and put you on the cart, you would die, but you survived that.
Still survived.
Then I thought by the time we got through the bumpy road back to the place, you would probably die, and you defied that. And it's like, what have you been fighting for this whole time? And what's the answer, Dom?
Well, the biggest thing is that, like you were saying in the pre-stream before we were talking, it shows the difference between broken men as far as like the Hound is so
well, you're skipping the answer, Dom. It's hate.
Yeah,
the Hound
exactly.
answers hate. Come on,
hate. So like
jump on the question.
So the whole thing is that like Brother Ray is trying to get at this idea, and this is kind of what I like about this whole episode, because this theme kind of stretches across all the storylines of the episode. Like I said, this is very much what I mean when I say this is very reminiscent of old school Game of Thrones, where old school Game of Thrones would always have these overhanging themes that would kind of tie all the different storylines together, no matter how many there were, no matter how many different locations they were at. And that's something that's another big thing that I feel like new Game of Thrones, like kind of once they got post season 5 and really into streaming, kind of lost sight of. And this episode kind of brings that back, where there's this arc of redemption that kind of hangs. The Hound, like Brother Ray is telling him, has been, he's still alive for a reason. Like I think Brother Ray also does a great job of kind of describing like the idea of religion, where it's like, who necessarily knows or cares what specific religion is more right than the others. It more so matters, just the idea that there is something out there, and whatever it is, it's got more plans for Sandor Clegane. But it's like, Jon and Sansa are still attempting to lead this, this path of redemption across the North in order to avenge the Boltons, in order to almost kind of correct where Robb and Ned went wrong previously. You have what's called Marjorie supposedly seeking redemption in the eyes of the light, when really she's attempting to redeem her family and all that they've suffered, the humiliation that they've suffered at the hands of Cersei. You have Jaime still trying to do right. Jaime's still trying to do right, obviously, at the siege of Riverrun, despite the fact that the Blackfish is just still not willing to let him forget his past at all, And the biggest thing, like you were saying, is that ultimately what ties this story together is that it's about like kind of understanding the nature of being broken and how to move past it. And as we see by the end of this storyline, the ones who are unable to move past it, they die. And the ones who can move past it, they have to. If anything, it's kind of like it gets back to the ultimate, like kind of one of the themes that we've been talking about since we started this podcast, which is you have to play the game in order to survive. And ultimately, playing the game means dealing and fighting back when this type of stuff comes. Obviously, you have a majority of these characters that are sick and tired of all the injustices that have been committed against the world. You have this character, the Hound, who had throughout the course of his arc over the first 4 seasons, had this kind of growing skepticism and growing anger towards the people that he served, considering that he realized that they were not doing nothing but terrible things and hurting people, and now he has a chance to finally redeem it. And his chances kind of miss. And so as a result, now it kind of sets him up on this path in order to ultimately, for lack of a better word, it's his reverse heel turn. He's a good guy now,
Yeah, 100%. Like, I'm glad that you brought up pro wrestling terms, which is
I figured that'd be a good way to appeal to you.
Very odd that we've brought it up a couple times on this show, but
so many times.
I like the face turn that the Hound takes. Here in this episode, he is definitely the baby face for the rest of the series, and obviously they're doing that to set up the whole fight with the Mountain, which spoiler alert, was disappointing. But the fact,
among almost everything else from that final season,
100%, and it's like basically, I think one of the great parts about this storyline is, again, it's about two broken men. You have Brother Ray, who clearly, was a vicious, follow what my superior officers have told me killer. He's kind of ruthless, and he got bogged down by that. So they set up this parallel that, what he did in his previous, life before, ending up here and building this sort of religious temple in the middle of the field, is very similar to the Hound. He was just a grunt following orders. He just didn't want to, necessarily be found out that he was kind of a phony, so to speak. And, I think one of the most poignant parts about this is, when Brother Ray is asking him, what made you kind of fight and continue and cling on to life? And the Hound basically answers hate. And, Brother Ray says, oh, that can't be it. There has to be another reason. And there's a very subtle, because you kind of go into this as a viewer as, Brother Ray is sort of mentoring and mending the wounds of the Hound. But ultimately at that point, it's like Brother Ray sees in him that the Hound is going to go forward and he's going to, sort of have an impact in the world. Whereas Brother Ray doesn't necessarily have that spark in his heart. Like, he doesn't know how to continue. He doesn't necessarily say that, and he hides it pretty well in the way the show is. But, it shouldn't surprise you at the end of the episode when we find Brother Ray hung from the thing, is because he never had, what it took to survive. Like, he just never got that back. And I think hate, when Hound answers that, Brother Ray just doesn't believe that's going to work for him. So there is this sort of like, is he questioning him and trying to help the Hound out? He's trying to have the Hound process things, or is he really questioning the Hound, in relation to who he is himself, to figure out like how he can really continue to make an impact in the world. So they are both broken men, and the story kind of, focuses on convincing the audience that, it is about the Hound being broken and then finding himself and continuing and no longer being broken. But to have that revelation, you need to understand that, Brother Ray is broken as well. And he is trying to he already knows that the Hound is going to be a fixed man and he's going to find his place in the world. It's Brother Ray trying to figure out what his secret is before he actually leaves them. And unfortunately he can't figure it out, and they get raided, and that costs not only Brother Ray's life but everybody else's. And the Hound comes back and stumbles upon it, and 100% that it's like the Grinch, right? His hate grew 10 times that day because he's about to go Rambo in the next episode. That's all I can say.
Oh, it's awesome. It's the only thing that's getting me through. What you just wanted to skip next episode and get right to the finale. Yeah, I like what you said about like kind of Brother Ray almost seeing the Hound as like a younger version of himself. Because if anything, like, and that almost again gets back to what I liked about old school Game of Thrones, which is kind of like the idea of like these legacy characters passing on all their good traits onto the younger characters so they can kind of pass them on. Jon Snow ultimately is still trying to do everything that Ned Stark did. Sansa ultimately ultimately has shown that she's learned from her captor. She's learned from Cersei. She's learned from Littlefinger, how to play the game and how to be this great manipulator in order to get what she wants, And in a strange way, I think that one of the minute scenes that actually still had a touch of some semblance of good stuff in those last couple episodes of Game of Thrones in season 8 is the moment when the Hound is talking to Arya and kind of like getting her to understand is like kind of this mindless quest for revenge is gonna get you nowhere. All it's gonna get you is just right back here. All it's gonna do is get you killed. And then what? Like, who cares after the fact? It's like go out there, kind of actually like have some drive. Don't just kill people for the sake of killing people, which is kind of, in a strange way, the same revelation that the Hound was having up to that point that he finally seemed to understand in this episode, and obviously going into the next episode, once he gets recruited back by the Brotherhood in order to kind of join the fight for the White Walkers. It's one of the few reasons, and I've stuck by this too, why I think that the Hound is one of the few characters whose arc I think actually succinctly carries over and is, I think, actually really well fulfilled throughout the course of the show, all the stupidity with the mountain aside, but we'll get to that we'll get to that once we get to the finals episode, a couple episodes.
Yeah, I think the Hound is definitely one of those characters that's a runner up. He's probably third place. You can argue whether it's Davos or Olenna. One of those two is probably the top two, and then the Hound in terms of I would say some of the best characters of the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because they're consistent from start to finish. They're awesome characters. They kind of bring a lot of story to the table. I think it's Davos personally because he's just, no matter what situation he's in, he's offering the best advice and, explaining things to characters and having them come together. And, it's the wisdom that he seems to have is not forced, and it seems to be right for the moment in which he uses it. And it always just kind of like makes it like, what, this character is believable. It's not like Davos is like, forced upon us and we don't believe every moment of it. It's like you can totally be on board with every interjection that he has. It just all makes sense. Lady Olenna, just the way she is, the sort of battle axe that says what's on her mind. She puts all the cards on the table, and definitely like the one card on the table that she doesn't have is the fact that she orchestrated Joffrey's murder, right? And one of the reasons why she can do that is because she is blatantly upfront about her position. If she's lost, she says it, in a very snarky way, like you might have beat me, but I still hate you. Puts all the cards on the table, and people believe, that she has nothing else to hide. That she's sort of just like letting things go. And it's the Hound is right behind the two of them in terms of just like he realized like, what is he doing, this for? Why is he protecting Joffrey? Why is he part of all this? And he goes on a personal quest to find who he truly is. And here it is, like seeing Brother Ray hanging from, this religious building that they're doing. Really, it's like, what? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take that anymore. That's 100%. That's the type of stuff I'm going to stop. And it's that sort of arc that we see throughout the series is consistent. The character's lovable, and it kind of gets us to this place where we really want to see him succeed in his ultimate mission, which is to square away the one last issue that he has, which is with his brother.
Absolutely, indeed. Could not agree more. So with that being said, let's hop to the rest of the storylines in this episode, because we've got a decent amount. This kind of, and another thing too, again, why I like this episode. This episode kind of reminds me, like I said, of some older episodes from seasons 3 and even early, as much as earlier as season 1. Well, at least for this stretch of the show, as far as its storytelling capabilities, kind of how it structures all the storylines. So another thing that we bring back this episode, and another kind of old school character that really is, super honest, brings, lays his cards out of the table and all that. The Blackfish, we get Riverrun and the Blackfish back this episode as well with the siege of Riverrun. Starts with a hilariously comedic scene with Jaime's army riding up and Jaime, having more comedic banter with, again, Bronn, who the show was just completely ruined at this point and is just running with it. He still gets a couple good funny one-liners in there, but it's like
I think
Bronn
Bronn
is almost aware of the fact that the show is just doing him dirty left and right.
No, I think Bronn is fine. It's one of those things where, like, clearly we're not going to see him succeed and get like the mansion and be happy. Like,
unfortunately,
he's definitely just sort of a.
Yeah, you're right, because we already saw him get that, and then the show took it away from him. So.
Yeah, but like he's sort of the side character that's needs to be by Jaime's side or by Tyrion's side, whatever the case may be. I think he's cemented as lackey. And not, we're not going to necessarily see any character development from him. And I think that's probably where your disappointment comes from, is that, you thought you were going to get this whole, cool arc where he kind of becomes, goes from, a nobody sellsword to a lord. And that's going to be sort of a major accomplishment of a character that, I think is a fan favorite. But ultimately he just, becomes a lackey that's just more well liked than others.
Yeah, 100%. So we get to, obviously, the siege of Riverrun. There's not too much that happens here other than Jaime just coming in and kind of telling the phrase what's what, seizing control of the, taking control of the siege, realizing, of course, that they're doing just a piss poor job because, once again, the Freys are just one of those families, they just can't do anything right. Like, and the only thing that they seemingly pulled off was the Red Wedding, and the only reason why they pulled that off is was because of help from the Boltons and the Lannisters, Honestly, kind of looking back, like, just seeing how this is managed, it's no wonder the Blackfish was able to take back the castle so easily from them. So, because it's like he says, it's like, so wait a minute, you mean to tell me that you've just been dragging Edmure out and threatening to cut his throat? Because that's the other thing too, they make it seem like this is the first time. Oh no, they've been doing this for like a week straight, and like just bringing Edmure out every day screaming, let go of the castle, we're gonna cut your nephew's throat. He literally says, he's like, look, he's as good as dead, cut his throat.
This is the whole thing about Walter Frey, right? Is like the reason why he was part of the Red Wedding is because everyone was laughing at him. And, that hasn't changed. Like, his house is the laughing stock of the Seven Kingdoms. And here they are, they don't even set up a perimeter. And Jaime walks up to them and is like, you literally just let an entire army walk up on you. You're lucky we're friendlies. Otherwise, you'd all be dead. Like, they really don't know anything about warfare. They don't know how to do a siege. And like you just said, they don't even know how to, threaten the Blackfish with Edmure's life. Essentially, they make the Blackfish feel like he's already dead, and it's like, well, if he's already dead, I might as well keep this castle. And that's not exactly what's supposed to happen in this situation. You're supposed to scare him into making a bad decision, and that's not the case. They just don't have the ability to do that.
Only because, again, the Blackfish is not the phrase. The Blackfish is an experienced battle commander. He knows what he's doing, and he knows how to not crack under pressure. And the biggest takeaway for me from this scene is the conversation that he has with Jaime, because what's so fascinating is that for the last couple of seasons, really since season 3, when Jaime had that awesome scene in the tub with Brienne, where he kind of confessed, his kind of the motivating factor behind his entire arc, that kind of like began his kind of heel turn. We all of a sudden kind of started to feel for Jaime and support and sympathize with him, despite the fact that he was back with the Lannisters and back with, the bad guys, quote unquote. But again, we've been spending so much time with the Lannisters at that point that we really didn't care. But what's so interesting about this scene is that this scene brings all of that kind of excess previous baggage that we thought we'd left behind with Jaime, and it brings it back and it kind of recontextualizes it, where it's like, yeah, we may like Jaime, but that doesn't mean that Jaime's a good guy, Like, we were only kind of really rooting for him in the last couple seasons because season 5, he was trying to get his daughter back, for Cersei, and then this season, he was trying to, get his, he was trying to help her take down the Sparrows, who we hated more just because of how irritating they've become, even though technically the Sparrows are, for the most part, justified in everything that they're saying, But what's so interesting about this scene here is that Brynden Tully, the Blackfish kind of breaks it. Is like, look, is like, I'm not making a deal with you. You're still an oathbreaker. You're still a man without honor. And he's like, I still don't see Sansa and Arya with you. You haven't upheld your vow. And Jaime's trying to fight him with logic and reasoning. He's trying to take him, with all these things that like kind of he's learned since his time of being a prisoner of the Starks. And the Blackfish is not having any of it, not at all. He's like, what's it called? He's like, look. We can last. He's like, look, the only way that you're getting me out of this damn castle is if you take the castle. Sure, we'll lose some guys, but you'll lose even more. And if you try to starve us out, we have enough provisions to last us 2 years. So good luck. We're definitely going to win over you. So
what has the Blackfish been doing that he has 2 years worth of provisions?
Hey, like I
that's
said, experienced
insane.
battle commander. He knows that castle inside and out. He grew up there. So like he's set. Like I said, this is foreign territory for the Freys, for the Lannisters. This is his home turf. So
yeah, 100%. And I want to correct you a little bit. I know we're dwelling on the wrestling terms here, but if someone's turning good, it's a face turn. If someone's turning bad, it's a heel turn.
That's why I said a reverse heel turn before, because I'm like, I only knew the term heel turn. So.
If you're gonna throw the terms out there, you might as well be correct.
Might as well be accurate about it. Oh, trust me, I can more than
trust me.
that.
I watched way too much of that wrestling stuff in my childhood, and so I know those terminology quite well. But hey, listen, the Blackfish, awesome character. Like, it's too bad that he wasn't really in the series. It's maybe an episode or two way back in season 3, and then now we have him in like 3 episodes here in season 6. It's like, where's this character been my entire existence here watching this show? It's great to have someone that can put some opposition to the Lannisters and really just put it plainly, like, we're not gonna give you what you want, and you're gonna have to take it, and tough. It's like, this is not gonna be an easy thing, like taking the Iron Throne. You're gonna have to fight for this. And the interesting thing here is that the Blackfish, sort of surmises that he doesn't think Jaime lived up to the expectations of who he is, in this meeting, right? It's like, oh, I kind of sized you up and you're nothing to me. It's kind of disappointing.
Right. Almost feels like he's trying to bait Jaime,
Yeah, but ultimately, as we'll see in the next episode, Jaime is, someone that, is a battle commander. He's someone that, usually does the honorable thing. But, in the next episode, he does essentially a cheap trick. He uses Edmure against his father and is able to secure the castle. And
against his uncle, but yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. So I got the relation wrong, but for the most part, Jaime.
Well, because don't you remember that? That's how they introduced him. They introduced him in season 3 when Edmure was trying and failing badly to try, shoot the arrow under his father's funeral pyre, and then he screwed up so badly that the Blackfish literally had to come in, shove him out of the way, and get it right in one shot.
Yeah, and it was like 2 football fields apart by then.
Yeah.
But whatever the case may be. That the Blackfish here gets outsmarted by Jaime, and Jaime shows us, the audience, and the Blackfish, a side of him that we haven't really seen throughout the series quite yet in the next episode, and so I'm sort of excited to see that sequence again.
For sure. Yeah, now we move to the north. Like I said, this is Jon and Sansa's recruitment train. We hinted at it in season 5, and now we're on to it. This is the recruit. They're going and they're getting their allies, and it shows. Man, the Northerners are not really as well equipped as they thought they were.
What is it? They're getting 62 men.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, from the Mormonts. It really shows that, like, it shows that really outside of the Starks and the Boltons, it's like, man, the uppers of the Karstarks really were the uppers of the Karstarks really were a majority of the power in the North. I'm still not quite sure why they didn't try to make a play for the Manderleys. I'm just assuming because White Harbor is further south than Winterfell, so they probably figured that they weren't really going to have a shot of making it to White Harbor because they would have had to circumvent Winterfell in order to get to that. But the biggest thing that's established here, obviously, is that, like I said, this is kind of them essentially doing what Robb was doing. Well, it's kind of a retread of Robb's what Robb was doing at the end of season 1, where, like, when we were talking about all the way back in season 1, and kind of what made that initial crowning of Robb as king in the North at the end of season 1 so impactful was this idea that the Northerners were trying to almost seek vengeance for how they'd been wronged in the past. Obviously, we talked about that the North had undergone this long trajectory of just, subjugation after subjugation and just insult after insult after insult, going all the way back to when when Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt for knelt before Aerys Targaryen, and obviously going back to Ned's father dying at the hands of the Mad King, them fighting in Robert's Rebellion, then obviously Ned going down south and dying at the hands of because of the hands of the Lannisters after uncovering the plot and everything. So It's two things that's established here. One, it's Jon and Sansa attempting to kind of recontinue what it is that Robb did and understand and learn that they're going to have a much harder time doing that because of the second part, which is that a lot of the Northerners are kind of fed up with, again, like they followed they followed Robb south for a war that they promptly lost. The ones that stayed in the north that didn't follow Robb south were probably conquered by the Ironborn and held in captivity and subjugation for God only knows how long. And as you see when they get to Robert Glover's house, at Deepwood Mott, I believe is where that is. It's like, yeah, those Northerners are like, yeah, we had help from the Boltons taking our castle back from the Ironborn, Where the fuck were you guys when all that went down, And so it's really interesting kind of seeing those dynamics and those relationships continue to play out. You have him go to the wildlings and Tormund kind of guilt tripping them into helping them out because, it's like, yeah, he literally died for us. We're not going to help him. And also Jon kind of being like, yeah, if you don't help me, then the Boltons are going to, then the Boltons and the Umbers are going to march on you tomorrow. So that one, he kind of just used a little bit of logic.
I think the wildlings, it's just a fantastic scene because it's showing that Jon, is a full-fledged commander and he knows the game. And the fact is, it's like, yeah, they're going to take us apart and then they don't want you here. So basically they'll take care of us first and then they'll come after you and then you'll be gone. And so the fact is, it's not really your fight, but it is your fight. And the fact is the wildlings have no choice but to join Jon and the Night's Watch and the rest of the Northerners in this endeavor against the Boltons. And so the fact is, it's just a really good scene. Like, again, you're hyping Tormund as, sort of the new leader of the wildlings, a really good friend to Jon. And you're just seeing the dynamic between the two of them. And really, he's becoming another fan favorite character, that ultimately has so many great scenes in the rest of the series.
Yeah.
The fact is, I think this is a well written scene. It's one of those scenes that's obvious, kind of obvious, like the wildlings, of course, are going to join him. It almost seems unnecessary that they have to spend so much time convincing them. So it's like a logical scene that we know what the outcome is going to be. And it's like, of course, they're going to join them. But, it's still, I think it starts sort of the whole idea of like how difficult it is, even the ones that seem so obvious to join.
Again, kind of harkening back to what Stannis was saying last season when Jon was talking to him about it. Is like, yeah, my brother often complained about how hard it was to keep the Northerners under control, even with your father's help. And that, I feel like that kind of applies to the wildlings because, again, as we've kind of discovered over the course of the last couple of seasons, the wildlings have a lot more in common with the Northerners than we give them credit. And the other big thing that happens from this kind of sequencing throughout the North is we get the introduction of a very big fan favorite character, the one who famously wrote Stannis, that letter that gave him so much ire last season, Lyanna Mormont, the current, the last surviving, current head of House Mormont. Obviously she's not the only last surviving Mormont member. Obviously Jorah's still alive, kicking around somewhere. But it's like she even says this, like, there's a reason why this character earned so much respect and so much love when she first came in. It's this pint-sized 10-year-old girl that's got the ire and determination and spirit of someone like Olenna Tyrell. Like, she suffers no fools. She lays down everything completely 100% honest at the table, and she's doing it. And she understands that
listen. It's the fact is they wrote a fantastic character, and they got basically a young actor to come in here and just nail the role. Yeah. There's a reason why this actor is cast in the Last of Us live action thing on HBO because they did such a great job in the few episodes that they're in Game of Thrones, and they just nailed it. And the fact is, you knew that they were going to land some sort of role, after Game of Thrones. And yeah, it's going to be that live action Last of Us thing. So every scene that, you have of Lady Mormont in this show, relish it because it's a great performance. It's a very specific character. You can almost argue that it's like one dimensional, but it's just the way that it's performed and just the scenes in which she's in. She kind of, just brings the tension up, brings the energy up. Things are serious, when she's around. So things are no different here on Bear Island when, obviously Sansa and Jon are kind of failing to convince her to give her men. And once again, it's my favorite character, Davos, that comes in and steps in and saves the day
100%.
here.
And it's a great scene. It's a greatly written sequence. It's a greatly written exchange. After she kind of smacks down Jon and Sansa, who kind of don't really know how to communicate with her. They kind of are only trained to deal with, like, older people, formal niceties. Like I said, Jon has only been trained in the ways of, honor and respect. And Sansa, obviously, like I said, has been trained by master manipulators. So she kind of is manipulating even when she doesn't realize it. And so it's up to Davos, who has kind of really the only one of these three that's had this type of experience with, for lack of a better word, kids these age. I bet she probably reminds him a lot of, obviously, the greatly departed Shireen, rest in peace. And so he kind of is able to appeal to her and help understand and kind of get through to her in a way that Jon and Sansa aren't able to, because he understands he's like, look, I understand that you're doing all this because you're scared. You're the last surviving member of your family. You're responsible for a great house, but you have to understand that this is what's going to happen if you don't help us. It's like, first off, you're going to have to keep calling the Boltons head, and we know that you don't like them, but worse than that, when he's able to kind of very compellingly convince her about the White Walkers. Not quite sure that he really has the means to justify. Obviously, he has backup from Jon, who's actually seen and fought them, but, like, once again, Davos proven to be one of the most consistent, one of the best characters, one of the best negotiators on the entire show as well. I'm not
He just knows how to read the room, man.
Yep.
That's 100%.
Exactly.
He just kind of sits back, he watches, and he knows when to interject. And without fail, they just know how to write scenes with this character.
Absolutely. Yeah. So got a couple of quick scenes left to cover before we get out of here. So we'll cut to King's Landing really quick. Not too much that happens here. Biggest thing that's kind of hinted is this is the beginning of really building towards Winds of Winter, where it's like the focus is majority on Marjorie, where Marjorie is kind of really continuing to hamper home this act. And the High Sparrow was kind of poking. He's like, okay, you were useful to me, before when you were able to get Tommen on our side, but now I need to make sure that you're actually on our side. And he does that by very not so subtly threatening her grandmother, where he's like, look, I've known people who they have memorized every word of the 7-pointed star, and they are still completely full of sin. And I've known people who couldn't read a single word, and yet they completely understand the father's wisdom, or whatever he was saying. And he kind of casually threatens, is like, look, your grandmother is still, she will continue to corrupt. And so if you are not able to convert her, then I fear for her safety, and so Marjorie, who's very clearly and very subtly still playing her own game, is able to get this message to her grandmother by kind of giving her the, by giving her that little note, that shows that's like,
I think 100%, like this sequence here between Marjorie and Olenna, it shows us that Marjorie is not fully suckered into it. Like, at some point it's, basically in the previous episodes, you're talking about, like, she goes along to get out of her punishment, to really, sort of ally with the High Sparrow, and ultimately seems like she is willing to cede some power to the High Sparrow in exchange for her freedom, for her, position as queen, that, she's willing to let him sort of pull some of the strings behind the scenes if that means she kind of can maintain power. And I think what the conversation between her and her grandmother does is shows that Marjorie's playing a game, sort of the game that she's been taught to play, in a different context, usually with just the husband, but she's playing it as if the High Sparrow is a husband to be manipulated and to be played in the way that the Tyrell women have played men in the past. And so it's revealed to us that she is on some kind of long con with the High Sparrow. And, I think Marjorie thinks this is the best way to not only defeat him as an enemy, but also to get one up on Cersei and defeat her as also a secondary enemy in this three-way dance.
Right, 100. And the other big thing, too, that this sequence establishes is just Olenna once again giving the smack talk of all smack talks to Cersei, where she's like, look, every situation 100%. That we are in right here is your fault. You were the one that raised these fanatics to power. Loras is in jail because of you. Both of our houses have essentially been, like, completely annihilated as far as their power and reach because of you. All this because of you, and now you're trying to make nice and play and what? And oh, now after all of these years of petty jealousy and rivalry, oh, now you want to make nice? Get the fuck out of here. You know, I think in so many words, Olenna says that. Once again, it's brilliant. It's
I don't think
satisfying.
she drops the expletives as
She doesn't
much as
have to because she's a lot
doing,
classier
Dom,
than me. But
yeah, but she, 100%. She definitely, this is what I'm talking about from earlier. She puts the cards on the table. It's like, I hate you. You destroyed both our houses. Like, you are one of the most what does she say? She says,
she's like, I wonder if you're the worst person I've ever met.
Yeah, exactly.
Hilarious.
Over time, you sort of, you're able to figure these things out. And you know what? I think, you are the worst. Like, it's like
Olenna's
such a attack.
Olenna's got to have what? A full 20, 30 years on Cersei age-wise. So she's obviously experienced a lot of people. She was around. She was there when like the Targaryens were still in command, So
yeah. But the thing is, we've seen characters who have said less to Cersei personally, who Cersei has really targeted and destroyed their lives, so to speak. And Olenna is just someone that can say these things and get away with it, and it's not a problem. Like, there's nothing that can be done to really put her down. So the fact is, it's like, Cersei, right? When she said, this is what true power is, to Peter Baelish, and, was showing that she can order the guards to kill him without any real reason. This is essentially another demonstration of that. Lady Olenna has some real power in the Seven Kingdoms where she can just say what she wants, and it can be visceral, and it can be, basically a personal attack on someone like Cersei, and she can get away with it because she has power behind her.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have two more quick stops, one of which is pretty good for the most part, another which we'll save for the end. But so Volantis, we have a quick stop on Volantis, quick filler scene with Theon and Yara. And this scene, it's so difficult because it's like every other Ironborn sequence throughout this entire season where I'm like, it's great in the moment. It's so awesome that we have the Ironborn back. It's so awesome that we're kind of bringing them back around into the fold. But in hindsight, what does it ultimately matter? Because Yara is here giving Theon this big pep talk. Again, I feel bad for all the people that were like actually suffering like real mental health and traumatic issues because, that watch the scene where Yara essentially tells Theon, is like, yeah, you're only going to be useful to me if and really helpful to me if you could actually bring kind of the old Theon back. So, and if you can, well, you might as well just go and slit your wrist and do that. I was like, God damn, like we're really getting real here. But I mean, I understand what she's trying to say. She's trying to, in so many words, get Theon back to his old self because Theon is still very much a recovery phase. He's still, very traumatized from the events of Ramsay. I love. It's just still it was one of the most memed scenes when it happened, and it's still one of the most unintentionally hilarious moments when she's like, "I know you had a rough few years," and he's like, "A rough few years," I just love the reaction there from Alfie Allen there. But I and like I said, it's expository sake. But my question that I wanted to ask you is does this scene get, of all the scenes that we've talked about with the Ironborn in the last couple, throughout the last couple of episodes, does this scene get wrecked by Theon kind of like withdrawing back into his shell in season 7, and then ultimately just the Ironborn almost getting completely forgotten about for the final season?
Yeah, I think this scene is a good standalone scene. I think everything that happens with the Ironborn in season 6, it kind of reminds you that they're there. It kind of sets up the fact that you have Yara and Theon versus their uncle Euron, right?
Yeah.
And essentially, like, all that stuff seems good. It's like, you're simmering something I want to taste right there on the stove. But obviously, when we get into future seasons, they go in a totally different direction, and still good characters. Still, I still think they're fun to watch in the next couple seasons. But ultimately, it's like not as the exact direction that I think it can go, or it doesn't necessarily lead to any consequential, plot that involves the throne. They're kind of just still there. It's like I never believed that the Ironborn are going to sit on the throne.
Exactly. And I don't ever think that that's their intention. It very much seems like kind of the Iron Islands are very much striving towards what the North is striving for, where they're striving for independence. And the Iron Islands always have been independent to an extent because, they're a chain of islands, but also they've always been striving for like that level of respect that kind of the rest of Westeros has always kind of looked down on them. They've always they've probably never really taken them seriously. They probably always looked down on them as like these thieves, these up-jumped raiders. They're nothing but a nuisance. They have a lot of Westeros here probably wondered, it's like, why don't we just conquer the rest of the Iron Islands and get rid of them? Because I don't exactly remember where the Ironborn are descended from. I don't think they're descended from the Andals or the First Men. I don't exactly remember, kind of the origin of the whole Ironborn religion. I would have to do some more research into that. But yeah, I don't really it sucks so much because it feels like it's building towards like something that could be bigger, where again, that's kind of one of the few things that like I think actually does save it when they finally do meet up with Daenerys, is the sense of where Daenerys is like, look, you guys kind of want this respect, you guys want this prestige, you want to be taken seriously as this real house. Well, then you guys are going to have to get rid of some of those habits that made us look down on you in the first place. Stop the raiding, stop the pillaging, stop the looting, stop the raiding. Screw that. That's your way of life. You want to be taken seriously as a real royal house. These are the things that you're going to have to do. And I'm not going to say that this is the beginning of it, but it certainly feels like it in the sense, of where Yara's trying to snap Theon back to it because she knows that she's going to need him not only for when they ally with Daenerys and when they take back their home from Euron, but also for whatever's going to come after it. It just felt like there was so much that it was building up towards, That was the other thing. One of the many other things about why I felt so shortchanged about the final season is the final season, there was so much that they had to wrap up, and it felt like they just got rid of so much. And literally within the first episode, Theon rescues Yara like it's nothing, and then they're like, oh yeah, I'll go take back the Iron Islands. You can go to Winterfell. And it's like, what? Like, what's going on here, So with all that being said, and also it establishes here that Yara's a lesbian just out of nowhere, and I'm like, okay.
Well,
like,
obviously you're saying it's out of nowhere. I think it's more like it kind of shows you that the Ironborn, they take part in going to the bordello and really getting a lot of stress relief in being sort of open with their, sexuality. Obviously she is a commander on the ships. And, she is a strong, character within the Iron Islands. And it almost presents her as, one of the guys. Like she is going to, use the opportunity to have a fun night with another woman, just like any of the men in the Iron Islands are going to do it. So, I don't know necessarily that it kind of characterizes her as a lesbian, as you say, but it also like obviously that's
I guess
that's
if
the
anything,
case,
it doesn't really feel like it's been built to. It kind of puts her on the box. I was just got the idea that like she was more so bisexual, if anything else.
I think it's more like just characterizes the societal expectations of the Ironborn.
All right, that's fair.
And, to me, and it also shows that like sort of the cloth that Theon was cut from, that they are like true siblings. Obviously, unfortunately, Theon has been castrated, and that's kind of been a very big downer for him in terms of
she's still cracking jokes about it too.
And I'm like,
game, but come on, like, is there no sort of levity? Is there no sort of brevity here or respect? But anyway,
yeah. Well, I think the main thing is like she says like for us that are still interested, and she's trying to get him to realize like, yeah, a lot of bad stuff has happened to you, but like, you don't have to be this glum sort of recluse. You can, get back in the game. Obviously it's going to be a lot different. But there's a little like subtext of the scene where it's like, come on, drink, with us, finish that glass of ale, find someone here that you can spend the evening with, like be the Theon of old. And obviously it's not going to be quite the same thing with missing body parts, but the fact is he can find himself if he gives himself a chance. And I think really that's the message that she's trying to convey to Theon. And again, I like this scene. I think it's a good scene between siblings that truly care for each other. One's trying to help the other, because that's going to be, if he's in the right frame of mind, that's when he's going to be useful to her in the endeavors ahead. And again, it's a cool sequence. The Ironborn, though, it just do not play this big part. So again, this being our like third, fourth watch through, whatever it is for you and I, it's like we know that these scenes are good. We know that they kind of build our interest. But when we get to the big like payoff, it's like, oh, okay,
well,
okay.
That was
moving on.
You know,
moving on to the next characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much what you can say about all the shows last season. Which, speaking of which, you want to talk about the definition of okay, let's move on. we wrap this episode up with and just what feels like just Benioff and Weiss's overall treatment on Bravos, where it's like, oh yeah, it's episode 8, yeah, let's wrap this shit up. We got to get a move on because like there's no explanation. There's no look. There have been people who have tried to make excuses for like just a lazy storytelling, but this for me is really, really where it started after. Because despite all of my complaining for season 5. At the very least, season 5 was a setup season, so it felt like I'm like, okay, there's a chance for this to be redeemed by what comes after. And for the most part, I'm not gonna let season 6 apologize for the sins of season 5, not by a long shot. But at the very least, for the most part, season 6 has been able to take all of the very stupid setup from season 5 and run with it for the most part. You know, a few exceptions here or there. But listen,
what's missing from this sequence with Arya is. Basically her with a mask and a couple other partners going into the Bank of Bravos, calling themselves after particular cities like Winterfell or Dorne or King's Landing and robbing the place, right?
Yeah.
You know, good old money heist, so to speak, in Bravos. That would have been a much better sequence than what we got. But
stop making me jealous for shit that we could have gotten, Pat. Come on.
Listen, I'm just saying, like, you know, clearly. She bribes someone, hey, you know, you're going to take me tomorrow morning. Here's 2 bags of gold. Like, where'd she get this money from?
Exactly.
You know, and she says,
funnily enough, I think I actually do have an explanation for that. What you want to know, and again, this is absolutely crazy. I don't know where I came up with this, but imagine
it's the money heist plot line that we didn't get to see on screen. That's where it happened.
All the silver that she got from when she was begging as a blind girl at the beginning of the season. It's the only explanation. It's literally the only explanation because where else would she have gotten all this gold from?
She would have figured it out.
Not even the worst part, like I said, it's the fact that because look, the number one sin that this commits is it almost makes me root for the waif. And you should never make me root for the waif, who's the worst character in any TV show ever. Where Arya is flaunting herself around like this royalty just across the docks of Bravos and is somehow surprised when she's been able to be set upon by a faceless person, and is also surprised when the first person that she sees who is so obviously fake. Like, you want to talk about like the worst guys ever. I'm like, I thought that the faceless member was supposed to be subtle, that you wouldn't be able to tell them. I'm like, I can immediately figure out that that's the waif, you know, and not even from a dramatic, ironic
just the way that it was shot. You know, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, she's about to get attacked.
Yeah, it's
like I don't think they were hiding it, and they didn't hide it on.
No, they weren't. But if anything, that made it worse.
Maybe
it made it worse that they were making it so painfully obvious. It's like, okay, we know what's gonna happen here. You know, you making it this blatantly obvious. Like, this is, I don't know if this is like just them trying to like get one over on the audience or just really, really not caring. But like, nothing about this works. And on top of
I think the thing that disappoints me is like she gets like stabbed 3 or 4 times in the stomach.
I counted at least 6. Least 6. The first jab and like 5 more.
Yeah, and then one of them's like, you know, deep and twisted, and it's like, how did Arya even survive this attack, let alone
no, that's
live?
not even the best part. That's not even the best part. So she headbutts the waif, turns around, pushes her. I thought that she like fell off the bed. No, she straight up jumps. She jumps at it, comes up, is like still like kind of paddling. I'm like, okay, so she's literally an NPC. She's literally an NPC character. Like, nothing affects her. She just took 6 gut shots. I'm like, I understand that TV shows and movies operate under a certain level of suspension of disbelief. But this is one of those moments where it's like, you're taking this too far. Like, come on. These are not
well, maybe she jumped into salt water, and that somehow
salt water doesn't cauterize wounds like that.
Yo, I know, but I'm just trying to. If anything, she would
die quicker, because you can imagine how infected those waters, those canals and Bravos are. They're probably filled with feces and all sorts of other.
This was magic salt water, you know, that helped with those wounds. You know,
stop trying to make up excuses for lazy writing, Pat. Come on, you're better than this.
Okay, I guess, but you know, the fact is, you know, she takes all these stabbing things. She jumps. She has to like nearly drown to swim away out of the way, you know, to away from the wave. And then immediately in the next episode, she's healthy again to parkour for half the.
Well, no. First, she's kind of sickly and like kind of recovering from that, but she's holding her wound. Then she gets patched up by Lady Crane. She's resting. Then the parkour sequence begins. After I'm like, I still can't explain how the wave killed Lady Crane, but I almost feel like this sequence and then going into the next episode, I almost feel like what happened was it's like Benioff and Weiss were sitting down in a room. It's no secret that Benioff and Weiss are secretly, huge fans of Maisie Williams. Don't really want to get into that, but are secretly, big fans of Maisie Williams. It's very clear that like Arya is one of their favorite characters to do, and so it's almost like they were trying to sit down and figure out. They're like, man, how are we going to wrap up this Bravos arc in a nice, tight, neat little arc and get her back to Westeros for the next 2 seasons? And they brought in Maisie Williams, who was like watching like the hardcore parkour sequence from The Office, and we're like, oh yeah, let's do that, but like not ironically, and it just the results speak for themselves.
I don't know if your theory here has any weight, but
probably doesn't. But it's the only way that I can make sense of this stupidity, because I'm like, it's so disappointing, because this is for the most part a really, really great episode. This is getting back to all the things that I loved about the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones, and then we have this stupid shit that comes in and just ruins it.
Well, again, I understand your anger, and it's definitely coming out with your expletives again. But the fact is, it comes down to one of the big problems with later in the series is that it's like, we got to do this quick. We only got a certain amount of screen time, and it's like, it's just a real down and dirty setup, and it does what it has to do, right? It shows you that the wave really does intend to kill her, and Arya, might not be able to escape her grasp. That's all the sequence does. She's trying to get home, she's trying to escape, but she might not make it alive. And I think it does exactly its purpose. The question is that what we, the audience, want? And I know the two of us really, want every single storyline in the show to be like novel-esque, good setups, good payoffs. Like, we want things to, move in a direction that we can just really like relish in that big moment later down the road. And it's almost like you said, like, yeah, let's just get straight to the point, let's move on. And I think that's exactly how this particular story wraps. It's like, we just need to wrap it. We need to sort of move Arya back to Westeros. And I feel like that's the treatment it's getting here in season 6.
100%. Well, we'll have plenty of time to discuss it on next week's episode. Like I said, really the only episode that I was just not at all looking forward to covering on this season. Season 6, episode 8, no one. I've famously been on record since I watched that episode as it being my least favorite episode of the entire show. We'll see if it still holds that belt, holds that record, holds that title once we get to the final season. But until then, Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, I'm on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. I'm posting things willy-nilly, so you might see something, you might not. Hey, one day you'll definitely, if you follow me, you'll get to see what I'm up to. Yeah, that's that.
Awesome. You can, of course, follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin' TV podcast across all platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Twitch if you're not already. And as always, people, we'll be back next week. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.